So certain of our life experiences are clearly fated, but the neat thing about the septile, referencing the phase that it's within, remembering that we're leading to a progressive individuation of what the original evolutionary purpose was way back here, and to get a progressively ownership, and to make it real, to consolidate, and to identify with it personally. So what happens in the septile, like all of us, when we go through life, there are times in which we reach the famous Y in the road, where either direction can seem co-equal. You know? And what happens, something at this aspect, is that those Y's in the road, the soul will manifest some sort of condition or circumstance to be embodied in another person that will suddenly seem to materialize or manifest, that has the effect of pointing out which direction. Go this way. And so the intent is to create a heightened alignment with the individuation of the original evolutionary purpose started at the new phase conjunction. This aspect can, of course, then be a very positive experience for most. Why? Because it keeps the person aligned, which is really setting up what is the follow. It's going to be the crescent phase sextile.
Do people feel good then, or is it an aspect you actually don't like because it's focusing on a direction you don't even know you want to go there?
No, actually it's more of a psychological relief of knowing what the direction is. So in that sense, and it's a very integrative aspect. It's a very creative aspect. It's heightening individuation, heightening individuality. And also, those two functions in that condition, relative to fate, can also have a fated application. Let's say we come back up to our example of Jupiter. It just may be that in certain cases that person is fated. Do something relative to that Mercury-Jupiter function is not only fated for itself, but fated for what? Other people, for the polarity phase. To disseminate, to give something that is now unique and individualized. Something that, from most people's point of view, has not come before. So it's a individuation aspect. Astrology, my view of it, has been really underestimated by many astrologers. They just don't even choose to really look at it. They notice it and they go past it.
But maybe because it's faith, if you give an advice as an astrologer to somebody, there's no make decisions, it's happening anyhow. It's important for a reason.
Yeah, I will go live in India. That's a perfect aspect. It's all fated anyway. Maybe India's a septile country. So again, in your own cases, reflect on your own chart, see if you happen to have two functions in this condition, and see if in fact you can apply what was just said to those functions. Just take a moment. So then from the spiritual state of evolution, they would perceive it that way. See the point? Right. And so in the context of the spiritual condition, let's say you put it in the context of somebody manifesting to point out the direction, what their soul would, is what they would perceive as spiritual people. You see? Mm-hmm. Right. Just depending on where you're at. Just starts making sense. Good. Let's take a little break. Okay. Before we continue, I want you all to be introduced. A really fine young man here. His name is Ryan. And he's a very young man who's trying to find his own unique and individual way relative to his peers and a difficult father, we can say that. And so I'd like you to all befriend Ryan, to really encourage him to be himself. He has tremendous capacity to do this sort of work, and he has a natural attraction towards it. So imagine a fellow in his age bracket. So I'd like you to all in your own way and nurture him and let him know he's doing the right thing. And so now we'll continue on our happy journey. Just to give you a teeny bit of feedback, Ryan was watching the videotapes from Pluto School and was really good, and his father came up and watched about 10 minutes of it and promptly said it was bullshit. So this is what he's doing. So let's continue our little happy journey here, and we get now to the point of crescent phase sextiles. So what we now have, following our evolutionary sequence, remembering what has come before, and that context and perspective, the semi-sextile now serves as the first aspect to integrate, to become consciously aware with understanding, and to integrate what has come before. The power of individuation can now be integrated, given a sense of personal purpose and meaning. Personal purpose and meaning. And the power of the aspect is to integrate. There's integration here of what has come before. So, from the point of view of the soul, this is like a relief moment. It's like you've run a 15K race or whatever, and you're chugging along all this distance, and you're tired, and you're going someplace, obviously. And from the point of view of evolution so far, this is like the finish line. Where after all that distance, you're trying to go, and you get to relax a bit. Meaning this is an aspect of psychological relaxation. It's like taking the kettle off the stove and letting it settle. Up until now, it's had a lot of boiling activity relative to discovery of new intent, purpose. And coming up to the crescent phase sextile, there's been this tremendous effort to discover, to establish, to begin this process of actualizing what this new evolutionary purpose was at the conjunction. There's now a way to integrate it, own it, give it a name. This is mine. This is what I'm doing. This is what I value. This is what I think. This is who I am. And of course, the ability to integrate the thing. A very constructive and positive aspect. The danger in this aspect is that it can create an intrinsic laziness. there can be an English word, inertia to it. Inertia. To stop something. Growth stops. You're lazy enough. And it's like it's gotten to a certain point in the journey and he thinks that's it. There's no more. I'm stuck here. I'm secure here. I own my well. This, so there's security in that. And that creates the inertia and the laziness. And meaning it can be very easy in this aspect to resist the ongoing, evolutionarily speaking, to continue growth.
Even if Pluto's involved in that?
Yeah. Because you have to remember one of the applications of the Pluto archetype is resisting something. Resist necessary. And when this is through Pluto, that resistance in a semi-sextile crescent phase can be really easy to do. So there is that intrinsic danger, and this is why, of course, we have a whole of the complete cycle. I mean, look what is still ahead of the individual. The evolution is not stopped, even though in the aspect many people want to think it's stopped in there. So what finally happens is if in fact there is that inertia, laziness, I'm only going this far, no more, then what will finally happen in evolutionary terms is that the person will get within themselves utterly bored and sick with whatever that inertia is about. They've come to a certain point and they've tried to sustain it so much, just that's it, that they finally reach a high degree of inner boredom because there's no growth. It's like doing the same thing over and over and you don't want to do it anymore. You've done it enough. And that's what this aspect will produce in awareness, conscious awareness. At some point, like the inertia is the primary psychological motive. And at some point they'll go, oh, now I need to grow. So the person then, in evolutionary terms, stays at this gate until the inner psychological motivation is to grow, until that actually begins to reoccur. Then they set themselves in motion, leading to the next aspect, which of course is the quintile. This is a 72-degree aspect.
What's the origin
On the semi-sextile, 4 degrees. Or the sextile, 4 degrees. And then we hit this quintile thing, and again that's a 72-degree aspect. The relevant orb is around 3 degrees or so. And the key words you have for this aspect are called creative transformation. And what that means is to take something already pre-existing and to utterly creatively transform it in the most unique and individual way possible. In terms of aspects of true individuality, this is one of them. I like to call it the Carl Jung aspect. When Jung took something pre-existing called Freud and utterly creatively transformed it. Jung. And you then see the impact on one society, disseminating polarity. So it's incredibly individuating, creatively actual. The quintile is a really highly productive aspect. And the quintile rarely is the wellhead turned off. It's continuous. It's highly creative, highly unique. And and normally in a psychological inner sense experienced very, very positively. And feels good about that aspect because it's an individuating that can also have this almost magical effect on others. So it's really about your own case. I mean, who have this? And what do you have? What two aspects? What planets are they?
Moon, Jupiter, I guess Neptune, Venus, and one more somewhere.
And have you found it working? Yeah. I mean, an example is you, isn't it? Jupiter. And have you found it operating this way in your life? And then this, of course, marches the individual on to one of the toughest aspects in astrology, which is going to be called the crescent phase square.
2 degrees.
2 to 3. Yeah. And by the time we hit this crescent phase square, because there's going to be two kinds of squares here, first quarter crescent, remembering that crescent, again, energy internalized, impression to create awareness of individual purpose and all this. The first quarter phase, like the new phase, is energy moving back out from the center to move into the world. Because now there's a need to integrate to what is being discovered in crescent phase. There's now a need to go back into the world. The crescent phase square has these two impulses. The crescent phase square is the completion of the journey of individuation, internally realized. There's to a head. The person is now getting prepared to act, to move on it, to bring it out to the world. There's this ongoing need to complete the internalization, to make it as individual as possible, or it is brought to the world, to bring it back out. So on the one hand, there's this incredible impulse to, in the most intense ways possible, to isolate and to create the situation. At the same time, they're already the evolutionary of the first quarter. So like you will see in the semi-square, you will see again this in and out action. Cycles of tremendous bursts of activity in the world, and then cycles of almost absolute withdrawal. And with respect to establishing in the world, all done through the effort in this aspect. There's almost no help. To self-effort, self-determination. A good character in history here that illustrates is the man of the community up here in Nevada State, and called it. This is a story by a chief disciple of Yogananda, a man named Kriyananda. And what this story is, Kriyananda, of course, was a disciple of Yogananda, is one of for reincarnating. Was in fact, in his words, to establish what he called communities by plain living and high thinking. It was an actual purpose of his. That in the context of his lifetime, he was only allowed to start in a very minimal way down in Encinitas. And he told Kriyananda prior to his physical passing, I want you to continue with this sense of purpose for me. I want you to establish the communities. So then after he died, he became VP of SRF and took it to heart. He was condition, so he used some of the SRS actually to buy some land up in India with the intent of community, and then all the people in us started trips and power trips and all this, and got that kind of crescent phase feedback, and he was then dismissed. And for him, that was spiritual worldliness. He spent 7 years, and he's got a moon, sun, and this aspect, the sun, moon. So he then spent 7 years in absolute isolation in his own spiritual wilderness, trying to determine, why is this happening to me? Why was I kicked out of SRS? I think I'm doing what Yogananda asked me to do, and this is a reaction to by the organization that he started. But it had to happen to force his sense of purpose, son, you see, through his own effort and relative to individuation, to do it in a unique and individual way. So then, as it turned out, he became aware of this via the spiritual wilderness, realized that he was meant to establish a community on his own terms and his own. And so then he went out and worked for X amount of time, making all the money himself, then bought up all this land that is now called Ananda. And once he had all that land in place, then he invited people to live on his land. But it was all done through his resources. Do you see my point here? And even after he established the community, he himself built his own place as far away from the other people as he possibly to continue isolation. Then as they did the devotees in this place, put him in such a, now think of this word in this phase, what his word was, so I became friends with him, that's why another word. His word was straitjacket. They were placed in straitjacket. They wanted to operate like a guru. And he himself is not a guru. He evolved, aware man, no doubt. Incredible depth of knowledge. But he's not a guru in a traditional sense. And wanted him to operate like one. He was put in a jacket. Based on, guess, look at the polarity here. Because of that straitjacket, this even motivated him more to isolate. Look at the face. It got so bad, he finally threw off his spiritual name, Kriya, and took his original name at birth. He called himself Donald again. He moved himself to Hawaii. And he just said, fuck this, I'm leaving you. Hawaii. Man. You see my point? And he became like a normal man called Donald. And he ended up getting hitched up with a woman there. That it's a funny story, like working in a McDonald's stand and already pregnant and the physical world, and he said, oh man, we're soulmates, you know, he did all this illusion shit around it, and said, oh, we're soulmates, and we're examples of the spiritual marriage, offer ourselves as examples to the rest of the world of how spiritual relationships. So it brings this one to Ananda, you know, with all the, look at the existing context. And here's this woman showing up in bikini things and, you know, hot pants and all. She's in the world. Already pregnant by another man. And this was, they isolated her. You know, she finally says, fuck it, and leaves Donald, and all these invitations have already been sent out to the famous, you know, we're going to get married. All this example is already out there, an invitation. She's gone. Look. And the key word for the first quarter is called a crisis in action. Where do I take myself in my physical life? What direction do I go? And see the archetypes, the story. You see them?
So, you're in first quarter square now?
We're showing you the interaction, the pull. So, you know, just to follow the way through, it's to the point now where he's not even allowed, he's not been isolated by the United States. He cannot come back to this country.
Why?
Because he's not a guru, and then so what was happening was in his community he took the vows of a monk, which means also and all that kind of artificial stuff, and because he was in violation of natural law, I mean he had a normal sexual function like most people do, and yet he had taken this on trying to repress it and all this stuff. So what he was typically doing in the beginning of his, he would have various women come to his place and give him massages. But in the context of massage, well, certain things. So finally ended up what happened that these different women, because of the current hysteria in America, that they wanted to report him as a sexual offender. Somehow trying to present that he was manipulating them to give him sexual relief in the context of a massage. So they brought him up on charges, and that's why he can't come back, because he will be arrested and put through court. He goes back and forth between Australia and France and Italy. So he finally formed an alliance with some woman up around us in Italy, and a Christian woman. And he's trying to do original Christianity, and what Christ actually taught, including meditation. And so they formed a really nice alliance and got married, finally. And this is consistent with, of course, Yogananda uniting East-West, and so they found a rationale to justify and this sort of thing. So now it goes back and forth in these countries. You can see even the isolation at this level.
Did you say what that means? You still with the thing?
No, she said, you know, I'll treat her same. So he's even more isolated. You know, for those who have read the first Pluto book, I detailed his case on the first house Pluto example. I was talking about living in a community and stories. In the book where it happened. And it happened.
Is he still teaching Kriya Yoga and still in charge of that community called Ananda?
Yeah, but it's from afar. So this is really the example of this crescent phase square. It's a really tough aspect. And you will see almost equally as strong as when we get to the disseminating square. We're calling that the Van Gogh. And you will see when we get there just why that is so. It's a toughie. So, any questions before we continue our happy journey into the first quarter? For any square is 10 degrees. Any other questions on it? How many of you may have this particular? And if you this what I'm talking about, you know, well, okay. So.
This is called the Wheel of Fortune.
The Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune.
Part of fortune?
The part of fortune.
Okay.
Not the part of.
That's the part of fortune.
Oh, I see. You can, you know, but remember that came out of Arabian astrology, and a lot of track points are just shit, and they don't apply. But some of them, and one of them, part of fortune. The simple way to know what part of fortune is, or typically, it's a instinctual point, an area in our life, inward or outwardly, that we instinctually gravitate to for a sense of well-beingness, psychological well-beingness. How you want to understand it. and it works that way.
And in terms of phases, which one's the point of reference?
Now, that's a good question because it's an abstract point to start with. It's the midpoints of various combinations of planets, and because there's no unique motion to it, I guess the only way you could look at it through a phasal thing is as a static point. So it would have to be a point of reference. It would have to be.
Point because it's measured from the ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
The phase of sun and moon,
Mm-hmm.
but then it had a star, so it must move very fast.
But it's going to be unique to each chart. So there's no motion intrinsic. It's a combination of other. And so, like even in that combination of the sun, when you start doing planetary phases to the sun is always your point of reference. Planetary phases to any your or motion between the two. So you see this problem. So I would have to say, just thinking about it, I haven't really thought of it before until believe it. But I would just say that would have to look like a static point.
Unless it was with the sun.
Huh?
Unless it was with the sun.
Unless it was with the maybe we'll destroy it. We will pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, no, not right. No. They have it conjunct. Well, I forget how many. And Venus and all.
So, we'll get into the first quarter itself. Here again you have the archetype of energy rushing out from the center to embrace the world. And came up with a really neat archetypical keyword for this phase, and he called it a crisis in action. Crisis in action. And what that means is that because in many ways, following new phase, crescent phase, individuation of the original purpose demonstrated at the original conjunction. Because see, the way you want to read that is because it keeps saying the words original conjunction. So say you have two planets in a new first quarter phase. The way you want to understand what that original purpose was with respect to the two planets in this condition, remembering that your baseline phase is the slower motion of the two planets. So you can understand what the original purpose was in the context of the current life by referring back to that slower moving planet. How assign it in, aspects it's making. What was the and now we have brought it all the way up to this first quarter square. And that means that that original purpose demonstrated in that slower moving planet has come all the way to the point of maximum individuation from the point of view of the ego, subjective awareness. And there is now a need via the archetype to move into the world with it. And what the crisis in action means is that the awareness within the first quarter phase a diversity with possible ways to move into the world. It can be this path, this direction, that path, that. And what the crisis is about, which one do I move towards? That is the crisis. In the first quarter phase, there is a fundamental and underlying fear of being by anything. Need for diversity itself. This is wherein lies the crisis on what you want to be doing. Because in the first quarter, then via the square, it does then itself demand, or typically, the necessary ongoing freedom to initiate again whatever experiences seem necessary, now with the individual intent in place, in order to continue the actualization and discovery of that purpose. Remembering that we have a progressive flow moving forward to give us full, and there is now there's going to be this progressive need to expand beyond the individual reality and to now begin the integration of it into the world, to the social world. And that's why we're bringing it out into the world. Something is being brought forth that is highly individualized. But again, the fear here is going to be, if I make a choice to do this with my individual purpose, then I'm going to I'm then limiting myself to fear. And so there can be a fundamental resistance, really, of making any permanent integration. And like, I'm going to do this for 20 years. If you say that to a first quarter planet, 2 planets in first quarter, they're going to go, fuck you. I'm not doing anything for 20 years.
If you have that, if you have a first first quarter square the nose, and so it's already square the nose, then it's a heightened.
Well, you've got skip steps on your hands to start with. So the first issue is to recover those skip steps. And then you go from there.
And then what do you do?
Then the answer becomes to, via activities in first quarter, the activity you're client is to choose something that is so comprehensive, something fluid, a sense of entrapment, limited, is relatively removed. Comprehensiveness and the fluidity of what that choice is. That's the challenge. But the other thing you want to tell them, just from a purely psychological view, is whatever choices are made will never, ever place condition. Because the impulse is to grow, grow, grow. And that means whatever choice they're making, there's going to be growth within the choice anyway. It's not going to become static. It's just a fear. And so if you can tell them just that, it's just a fear. Recognize it as such. That of itself can be incredibly helpful for that person.
That seems like fear is being stopped or
Limited.
limited.
What happens if the person, like, he's deciding to do both? Instead of doing 2 things, and because of the fear, they just keep doing both. They want to keep, like, not going to each one?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. See, another fear is it's a strange fear, but the fear is if they make to integrate this function in the context of the world, that somehow the world is going to have the effect of reabsorbing, meaning losing this hard-won individuation, being reabsorbed. And that of itself can, via the functions, first quarter, keep the person on the outskirts of the system, the world, the society, operating on the fringes. Sort of like a touchstone that you put on water. In other words. And it's called like that. Operating in the world like that. So there, when you're observing this, again, your words recognize this as a fear only. It's not going to happen in reality. And there's again just this need for ongoing discovery. So what happens, for example, if you had a person who had Mars-Venus first quarter? Do you think that archetype itself would fit well into traditional tradition defines cultural ideas? Not at all. It creates a logical conflict. On the one hand, I mean, most want to complete themselves in relationship. Well, look what they're all fucking doing. But there's power in that relationship. Cultural. So, see, this is because later on in the school, we're going to be getting relationship stuff and synastry and energies come together and all this. And one of the things you want to be evaluating in relationship analysis is each person's Mars-Venus phase. And so do you think, just for make an example, do you think, understanding the archetype now, that a first quarter phase Mars-Venus would fit well with somebody who, say, had Mars-Venus disseminating, which disseminating is the entire and full impact of socialized conditioning to any of us. So if I, say, have Mars-Venus in a disseminating phase, and I'm like most people, meaning consensus, I want to naturally define the structure of my relationship according to current tradition. Now, we already know what current tradition is. What would happen if that person is trying to marry a person with Mars-Venus? You see what I'm getting at by phase? And when you do the work over the years, how Mars-Venus phase relationships line up together, it becomes amazing. Typically, first quarter Mars-Venus people can only be with other first quarter Mars-Venus people. They can also, last quarter, they can sometimes do fairly balsamic. They don't really do that well with new phase, because the more independence than the first quarter. Balsamic can adapt to anything. It's an incredibly adaptable thing. But for the balsamic Mars-Venus people to feel best in relationship, generally they have to be with Mars-Venus balsamic and or first new, because new phase has just come out of balsamic. Anyway, you start doing astrology like that over the years, you'll see how people begin to line up naturally, their energies, relative to phases. It's really fascinating. So, there's a tremendous energy and intensity down in this aspect for the individuation and to begin the establishment of a person's individuality relative to new phase, purpose, original purpose to the world. To now begin to take action on it. To move into the world with it. From the present phase point of view, there's of itself no concern about moving into the world with it, and because of it. Just the opposite. So now you see the reverse. It's a tremendous growth-orientated aspect. It creates a psychological tremendous degree of restlessness. Tremendous inner restlessness. The first new phase, or this phase, rarely does a person go, aha, that's it. They just want to keep going and going. And so it's a tremendous orientated aspect.
To the great square that's in our planet, would that be like there's a great deal of energy that's moving people to grow crisis?
Ecuador right now is vastly different than the existing U.S. The existing context of myself is vastly different than the existing context of someone else. So it depends on the context or whatever to determine how it will manifest in each case. So, question. So this assumes we're perfectly clear, huh?
First quarter want less in the new phase? Is that because the new phase wants freedom to try whatever?
Right.
The first quarter wants freedom to do it their way?
Right. To put it. Seeing nothing is pre-nothing. That's why it's so deep for individuality and independence, freedom to discover. It's like taking unformed clay and trying to form it. On the new phase conjunction, it's utterly unformed. I have the first square, or that molding of that raw clay has already been made. Now, one problem in the first quarter, it can be susceptible to whatever the newest, grooviest cultural cliche. For example, in the late 60s, with the hippies in mind, he was experimenting with ways of living in general, including sexually at that time. The local slogan then was free love. That's when transiting to the Libra. And so a current new groovy thing within that peer group, never. But the point becomes, via this aspect, is are those new current cultural trends, in quotes, really part of who you are. Just doing it is the thing to do. So one of the things you want to talk to about these people with respect to them is this: do you really feel this is you, part of you, or doing it because that's the newest group thing to do? You have to talk to them. Because for many time, whomever, those people, it was nature.
A lot of people got mixed up.
Clearly. I mean, this is when the whole issue of disease is being spread like crazy. This is when herpes manifested. For the first time in human history. Yeah. The mutation of a virus. And that's why they couldn't treat it. They still can't.
That's true for everything happening in first quarter phase, or is it just for the square?
It's really come, it's its maximum extreme at the square. And as the person progresses in evolution, there's more ability to know which. So, because we have to remember everything into polarity. Here's last quarter. Of course, the Rudar came up with last quarter, or crisis, not in action, but what he called crisis in consciousness, which means crisis in belief. And so, link these two things. It's an action linked with a crisis in belief. Remembering whatever our beliefs are going to determine how we're in this world. So typically, interplay. And it's amazing to observe when you these people with it. They will typically be a crisis in belief. Come up with sort of a way of rational. Whatever the behavior is about, to find a way to explain. Philosophy is so good, a construct, which rationalizing. Whatever the current activity is, But once they're done with that, they have another crisis. And they find yet another way to super-explain, hyper-rationalize. Do you see that? And then it can be well thought out, but the motive is rationalization. You see, when you observe, you see really careful now. Because the person's utterly convinced. Another time when you see this happen, you're going to get into transits at the end of this school. Happening all the time. Transits to them, transits to your natal chart. And you can now create transiting phases. For example, we suddenly have a first quarter relationship between our natal Mars and Venus, for example. For a person, is an action. Impulse to happen in their relationship. It's time to expect it. Let's say the existing part is some creep. It's just hanging out in the for all and not growing. Fuck you. I mean, they just need they attract who's willing to help them grow. And I always say, a crisis, and do which direction do I go? Implication if. How this can work. We have to also look at it this way. And that's astrology. When you start putting all this together, you snapshot of anybody at any time. And see exactly where they're at and reasons. And if you reference it all back to their own intentions, we have to understand that we look. And if you have knowledge, look how validated the client. You see that? So, so now we move up into the next aspect, which is a trine. 120 degrees, first quarter.
Key gate, that one?
So the key gate.
How many degrees are we using trine? Or in trine?
So, relative to trine, you have again the power of vision, the power of understanding, what is going to be understood, what is going to be integrated. Everything has come before. And what this means is that from to the trine, there'll be a lot of experimental action, trying that, trying this direction, trying on that form. Sort of like when you go into a store and you have an intent to buy yourself a new jacket. How many people walk right up to the immediately take out the jacket and walk to the cashier? Most people leave it things. They walk on a diversity of things, trying to feed which one fits them. So between here and there, it's like walking into that department store, putting on different jackets. And by the time we hit this trine, oh, that's the jacket. That. It's just when they put on that jacket, it's like when you find that piece of clothes that does it make you feel?
Great.
See?
If you don't like it.
That makes you feel good in this case. And this is the function of this outfit. It's to like tie a bow and what's come all the way from here. Because to this aspect, things get pretty fucking tough. For a while. And also an umbrella. For all this.
In chemistry, the Mars-Venus relationship between two people that have would be like they feel that they fit with each other.
Yes. There's a real mutual honoring of each other's in yourself. What happens in many cases, they really help one another. That journey together is a way of integration. So, and this is on the program, this integration, a way of giving individual purpose, a way of individual and so on. They come to a place in themselves in which the diversity of possible directions has in fact now been up individual. I'm going to go this way. And the stage for what is to come. Because this is very Leonian. Leonian, first quarter trine. The soul is literally it's ready to burst on the edge of life. And a Leonian recognize me. Like, here I am. You know, like there's this expectation to be acknowledged without. That's what it is. But it's in this aspect. At some point, all of us, in various ways and for different reasons, have to be full of ourselves. With a motivator to actualize. Or you let the balloon into it. And so what this happens is the ego bubble of the soul has been finally put full of a lot of air. And it is literally full of itself. And it wants to now begin the process. This is what we're going to begin. Of letting this air play out of this balloon. But at this gate, it's full of itself. And necessarily so. We look at this without any other judgment. There's an element feel about itself. There's no conflict here, in sight. They're going to experience it soon enough. So, for a little, for a little.
Time with that bit about them.
Also make less likely that people come up maybe they're not right on everything. For example, if there was in this trine, they just how families should be put together, right? Now,
Yeah, true, but they wouldn't have conflict with somebody else.
person would they feel right? Or would they be other people's ideas?
A way not in agreement, have to around it. Like I say, if you had with your first quarter, you'd have a naturally argumentative person who is needing to prove to anyone else the uniqueness of that's why even on ability to learn basis. Hey, no, no. And that's back. Or was I? Hello. Have to assert that disagreement. Example. Of others. No matter they've allowed them to bring in the information. You don't
Point of view from the beginning, theoretically, Paul started, for the function of for an individual.
be really magnetic. Naturally, people who conform. I won't. So we have this integration function disseminate full of air. Setting in motion, there's this ongoing awareness of the social order, and therefore it's becoming to name Tusky Square. Tusky Square. And the lead forth the world. This now begins. And this progressive out of and because progression becomes this individualized this aspect, ego is full of itself. And so what this journey becomes is to humiliate, to let anything ever get done.
Is that how you said Italy function? Is that how you said Italy function?
Italy. And they're girls on these Italian men. The more and more Italian young women are associated because women there are becoming to be with this really strong man. Because a woman is progressive to do
Does it manifest like a violent?
these pretty violent out of Italy. Especially the Sicilians. They're the worst of all. Please do not marry a Sicilian man. So, that's Sky Square. And the original image means aware. It's not Zarathustra. It's not superhuman. It cannot revolve around as a how is this then experienced in this particular aspect? This makes feels a psychologist. And it tells itself to be a naturalist. Itself it would of itself need to go to school for 7 to fucking know it. be a psychologist from the point of view of society. So you see the impact of the world. To make social order, they cannot act in that world. This is preparatory to become social equal, superior. Equal. His reality is co-equal and relative, not whose reality is more important than someone else. View of the orientation of the ego. And so the alignment is experienced how? By blockage in the social environment. Stress, conflict, and expect to out of it. And then mention of the aspect. Everywhere. Out of everything that's talking or forcing, the underlying impulse. Then it can become bitter. And it's finding enemies everywhere. Why? It's feeling persecuted in the aspect. You have to we have a combination. The I keep my finger on, but why? So when you're inspiring person, the dimension of it, of it. Oh, now in order to do this. If you know that algebraically, it's relevant. Terminology, the vocabulary, psychology, I've seen certain means leading to certain means that they themselves, this, the way you would be talking to them follows. You do not have to agree with what you're learning. You want to. Paper can do and you can be use this kind of vocabulary. In this phase, you work with reverse logic. You'll be exactly out. So you work with reverse, and they can tell you you're right. This aspect also, as to look at oneself and to begin the process of inwardly analyzing oneself, how and why they put the logically in consciousness, and what the psychology will mean progressively as the aspects on but it's an ongoing psychological, it needs to be adjusted. Or can be probably in the South very hyper self-critical. There can also then be critical, like a consciousness that becomes self-analytical of its own crap and has its own inner vibration, then it's really challenging. Itself for people seems quite.
Doesn't that feeling, like beating yourself up, keep you in the...
I mean, how many of us would like to be around somebody who almost his day is just that's what I mean, if you follow the rules, psychologist was out doing what they need to do. Give us phase. Feel the capacity to be psychologist, but because of the heightened what? The other, yes, to be my inner. Would because the country, the increase in expansion called the planet, and of course the increase in awareness of other people and the relativity of reality represents our valuations, belief systems. Well, given the by the person put out the Mercury Jupiter when we have a gibbous scar. Because when first quarter, conflict with wisdom. With a person progressively with how to get involved. Internalized, self-critical. It's the opposite. It's always like an ongoing mob that is hyper self-critical, that is focused on lack and what moved. That also rationalization. Sure. It was started and make it awful. Because the thinking doesn't have to look at it logically. Taking action. You can't into existence. You have time. And 46 work. You have story that direction. Do you know also play what profession mark initially in the you just take it. Give us the really can feel like even the will to influence their life. That it can almost be the appearance. That's the key word. Or they like to with that. Enforced victimization. Unless you have no.
Well,
Your job is to find out what those next with say what you tell them. Some deliver that message. Do you understand my point? Or counselor may be to be an in this essentially allow um, there are that very clear that so this the ego. Interesting aspect. Something among give from give us there's two. They should do when they should for them. That becomes a crisis through non-performance, non. Another kind of crisis, feeling willful activity now chi-square disaggregated. You know, just geocentric consciousness. This is what this has done. And what total need relative to be sustained. And you're stating behalf of wisdom. And when portion that somehow see how this is going to inflate the ego. Right there. You go live in a natural tribe like I live with Navajo, and it's simply co-equal. The shaman has no more of no right to have a vote that's more important than the corn picker's vote. They have an equal voice there. But there's a natural respect for each function. They're equal to the whole. And that's how it's seen. So the distortion you start the acre got into my that's what happens in this condition. That fact. So the inconvenience it creates awareness, visual awareness, awareness, will, born into low class. You see my point? And that's just based on the social. When Clinton became, remember, no, Clinton's just all these other are who we are, and I started making that really with get a piece of paper. These to the getting the then on a in these out some help. Phase, but a certain percentage, even nothing forever. This is what drop. And feeling what, and there's what relates to this autism. The belief this is really a full do beside pain. Overwhelmed. Also, reading this book, taking that class. Sincere work. That's a preparatory to what? The deflation point becomes superior. And that's a pretty aspect. I use around 5 to. Yeah. 5 now. Has to be to the soul mind. And it sets up a way. Night. Say, and this would home. Comparison related. Wealth. Positions. Position to the position. And social the This is what dialogue are from us relative to integrating. In the orientation to reality versus objective. What belief systems, lifestyle, countries in the context of reality to this progressively individuality. In my training or based comes out the same polarity. Now that they end up inwardly renewed. Their instinctual nature. When the instinct diminishes, the all seem to, but that becomes a new phase. Phase, deeply. That if the phase is coming from other where what these opposites intent here. People so all you have opposition, figure out the nature of the archetypes that's in opposition and why they're in opposition. Why your soul needed to put it together this way. There's an intent to all things.
Let's go back for 1 second to the inconjunct. And when you build of God, is it always one of each?
No, you have to have two inconjuncts to make a finger of Yod, or the finger of God. No, either. What? Experience through opposition. And ninth house, some specific concept is very limited. Yet my what so sure we're all covered. Give us your own kind of the obvious full the full phase from They want to do a hammer thing to sort of have, and in the very they want to assert full faith. And conjunctive is right in will relative to whatever the function is. Tell that it is. This is intentional to create the necessary clock. And listen to around me with their towels. All his capacity, what he's listening. Experience. I have a murder. Martina. I kept finding reasons. Right. That came along. Shows up. Now you have to, right. Because I just wrote and some and simple work. Changed. They'd be so to do that it didn't, in a sense, make it unable to most. They didn't write that book, it wouldn't. chi-square. Now in full phase, you're giving totally of your stupid society. More to sustain itself through so now helped us as a so what this is about is that whatever remains you and it's expecting is opposite his intent was